Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute masterpiece of psychological fiction. I'm talking about Joseph Conrad's 1900 classic, Lord Jim. Now, this isn't just your standard tale of adventure on the high seas. Oh no, it is a profoundly gripping exploration of guilt, honor, and one man's desperate quest for personal redemption. We're going to track a young British seaman's journey from the sprawling seas of Southeast Asia straight into the deepest, most remote jungles, literally mapping out the architecture of his own mind along the way. And what makes this even more incredible? Conrad wrote this stunningly complex psychological puzzle in English, which was actually his third language. I mean, wow.
So before we get into the heavy details, ask yourself this. Have you ever made a split-second bad decision? A moment of sheer panic, a lapse in judgment, something you instantly regretted but felt like you could never, ever outrun. Well, that is the exact psychological anchor of this entire explainer. We're taking that highly relatable modern anxiety and projecting it onto a grand 19th century maritime plight. It's really about how a single second, just one tick of the clock, can completely define or utterly derail an entire lifetime.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to trace Jim's journey through 5 distinct stages: the heroic illusion, the Patna disgrace, wandering in shame, rebirth in Patusan, and finally, the ultimate moral test.
Starting off with Stage 1, the heroic illusion and Jim's early ambitions.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we actually get the story. Picture a young, intensely idealistic British seaman driven by these sweeping romantic ambitions. Jim doesn't just want to be a sailor, right? He dreams of becoming a legendary, heroic figure out in Southeast Asia. He basically lives inside a world of adventure storytelling, deeply insulated by his own illusions of grandeur. But Conrad doesn't just hand us a straightforward adventure story. Instead, this whole nonlinear narrative is filtered primarily through Marlowe, our narrator. Marlowe treats Jim like a complex psychological mystery that absolutely needs to be solved. He's totally fascinated by Jim, this idealistic but deeply flawed protagonist. And ultimately, Jim is going to be contrasted against Gentleman Brown, who is the absolute embodiment of cynicism and moral corruption. But to understand how we get to Brown, we really have to look at what breaks Jim in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Patna disgrace, a catastrophic failure.
So, we are faced with an incredibly stark contrast here. Everything Jim thought he was is about to be violently tested in the dead of night. On one side, you have Jim's internal ideals, his absolute, unwavering certainty that he is a brave, legendary hero in waiting. On the other side, the harsh, brutal reality. Jim is serving on a ship called the Patna, and in a moment of absolute, blinding chaos, believing the ship is about to sink, Jim panics. His base instincts completely override his grand ideals, and he abandons the ship. He literally leaves behind hundreds of helpless passengers just to save himself. It is a devastating, split-second act of pure cowardice. But here is the agonizing twist. The ship did not sink. Seriously? Based on the real-life scandal of the SS Jeddah back in 1880, the Patna is actually rescued. The passengers survive, and Jim, he is thrust into this devastating, highly public disgrace. Think about it. If the ship had gone down, his secret cowardice might have just been swallowed by the sea forever. But because it survived, his absolute failure of character is exposed to the entire world. The irony is just agonizing. And that leads us to Section 3, wandering in shame, as Jim desperately attempts to escape his past.
Notice the immediate crushing weight of public disgrace on day 1, right following the Patna incident. The grand adventure is just gone, totally replaced by this mysterious, reflective, and deeply lonely existence. By month 6, Jim is basically a drifter. Whenever someone in a port town even whispers the name Patna, Jim just packs up and leaves. He moves further and further away from civilization, and by year 2, it's abundantly clear that he is completely haunted by his guilt. He's trying so hard to put physical distance between himself and his ruined reputation, but as we all know, you simply cannot outrun the ghost of your own mind. His quest for personal redemption is completely stalled because he hasn't actually faced what he did.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. Rebirth in Patusan and Jim's second chance.
So, with Marlowe's help, Jim settles in the extremely remote region of Patusan. And it's here, traveling far, far beyond the reach of his ruined reputation, right in this isolated sanctuary, that something truly remarkable happens. Jim finally begins to bridge that massive gap between his grand storytelling ideals and his actual reality. He actually steps up, he protects the people, he earns their deep respect, and he genuinely becomes a true leader. I mean, they even start calling him Lord Jim. For a time, it really seems like his quest for personal redemption is complete. He's finally become the hero he always dreamed of being.
So the crucial point here is the true definition of honor and integrity. It's the quality of being brave, worthy, and steadfast, especially when tested. Right? Like, it's pretty easy for Jim to act like a hero in Patusan when things are going great and his past is a total secret. But true integrity isn't about how you act in times of peace. It's about what you do when the pressure is really on. And Jim's perfect new life is about to face a monumental threat.
Section 5. The ultimate moral test. Confronting corruption.
And this brilliantly illustrates the final, absolutely unavoidable collision of the novel. Everything Jim has built in Patusan, all the trust, all the honor, is about to be thrown into a terrifying, tense crucible. Jim's desperate need to maintain his hard-won integrity is matched directly up against our antagonist, Gentleman Brown. Brown arrives in Patusan, and he's basically a dark mirror reflecting Jim's deepest fears. Brown is completely cynical, he's morally bankrupt, and he somehow intuitively senses that Jim has a dark secret of his own. This isn't just a physical standoff, guys. It is an intense psychological war between Jim's reformed idealism and the dark, inescapable reality of human flaw that Brown represents.
Let's break down exactly how this tense final crisis plays out. So, Step 1. The villainous Gentleman Brown arrives and essentially holds the entire piece of Patusan hostage. Next, in Step 2, Brown manipulates Jim, forcing him into a sudden crisis and an absolutely impossible moral dilemma. Jim has to make a choice. Does he fight? Does he run away again? Or does he finally take responsibility? Jim ends up guaranteeing Brown's safe passage, but Brown betrays him, which tragically results in the death of the local chief's son. Now Jim is at Step 3, the final stage. The old Jim, the panic-stricken Jim on the Patna, would have absolutely run away in the night. But this time Jim chooses to face the consequences. He walks right up to the grieving chief, taking full, unflinching responsibility.
It is a tragic but incredibly honorable end. The chief shoots Jim, and Jim accepts his death willingly. It cost him his life, yes, but in that final, defining moment, he does not flinch, not even a little. He stands his ground. He faces his fate with the exact courage he so desperately lacked on the Patna.
Which leaves us with this incredible, lingering question to close out our explainer. Did Jim actually achieve true redemption? Was offering his life to the chief the ultimate proof of his honor and integrity? Or was this final heroic act just another illusion? Was he just a man so obsessed with his own romantic image of martyrdom that he threw his life away just to prove a point to himself? Conrad, brilliantly, doesn't give us an easy answer, and Marlowe leaves us completely guessing. It's a psychological puzzle that makes Lord Jim an absolute triumph of literature. So think about Jim's journey and decide for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.